Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to another CEN seminar. Very, very exciting talk for you today. So we have the dynamic duo, Jo van Herwegen and Karen McGuigan. And they're going to be talking to us about a very exciting differentiated approach to the maths curriculum developed by Karen called Maths for Life. So I'll just introduce them briefly. So Jo is a professor in developmental psychology and education at the Institute of Education, UCL's Faculty for Education and Society, and also director of the Child Development and Learning Difficulties Lab. Her research focuses on improving educational outcomes for those with learning difficulties and neurodevelopmental disorders, using evidence from developmental psychology and educational neuroscience. Then we have Karen, who is the founder of Maths for Life. Karen studied maths at degree level as part of her master's in chemical engineering at Imperial College. Originally from Northern Ireland, she now lives in Surrey with her partner Mike and her three sons Dexter, Lance and Cal. Karen set up the Maths Mum in 2018 with the aim of helping parents help their children. And inspired by her middle son Lance, who has Down syndrome, she began the development of the Maths for Life program in 2019. Very excited to hear about this. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Astrid, for having us. So, yes, thank you all for being here. I'm going to quickly kick us off, giving you a little bit of background and literally one slide. I think we can all agree that maths is very important for children to learn. It's related to independent living, taking a bus, reading a timetable, being on time, as well as recipes, banking, all of it, understanding your rent, interest rates, etc. It all involves maths. So it's a lot more than just adding and subtraction and memorizing timetables. And I think this is what Karen very nicely puts on the foreground in her Maths for Life program, which we'll be talking a little bit more about in a minute. So when we talk about mathematical development, we talk a lot of different things that need to develop in line with each other. So we're talking about numerical relationships and number facts, such as the timetables, procedural skills around how to solve problems, as well as concepts. What does zero mean? What does equal mean? And then, strategy choice, which is very important, of course, because when we solve mathematical problems, there's often more than one way that you can do it. And that's important to kind of see whether some students who have mathematical learning difficulties might be able to solve problems in a different way, or if they're taught in a different way or with different scaffolding. So that's about maths. When it comes to students with special educational needs, we know that there is a gap in terms of their attainment and learning outcomes. So a recent report by Sam Tuckett et al. At the Education Policy Institute has shown that this is your special educational needs and disability students without an EHCP. They have a gap of about 30 months at GCSE level. And when we look at those with an EHCP, we can see that goes up to about 45. And on the right-hand side, it tells you what that means in terms of their grades. We also know that 52% of students with SEND do not reach their expected standard in maths at Key Stage 2. So there is a real gap here, and especially for mathematical development. And this is the starting point for Karen to take over and tell us a little bit more about how Maths for Life can fill this gap.
Thank you. So when I started out the program, Maths for Life program, I was very, very clear with a definition of what it was going to deliver. And I wrote the statement, the Maths for Life program will provide a differentiated approach to the maths curriculum that lays down solid foundations, it's framed in practical understanding and delivers the essential maths needed for life. It hasn't swayed from that definition, but now we sum it up into simple maths done accurately and independently applied in real life. So this really does, going back to that graph, it tackles the fact that there is a small percentage of all students with SEN that will not attain a level of maths that they need to actually operate independently in the real world. And what we actually do with our program is we prioritize life maths first. We look at prioritizing the skills and the processes and the strategies that we need in life, and we look at being able to do them independently as well as accurately. If we could move to the next slide. When we set about doing this, I looked at what was existing and decided that very often we're in a position when we look at SEN where we take something that works for the masses and we shoehorn it to fit the SEN population. And for me, this was always, you know, it's very apparent in everything we do when you have children with additional learning needs, even physical learning needs, you know, trying to get clothes for Lance is always taking something that was built for a standard sized 11-year-old and then having to modify it. So I was very adamant that the pathway needed to be designed specifically for those with learning difficulties. So we started again from scratch. We built from a blank piece of paper a curriculum that, when we built up, prioritized all the foundation building blocks and then moved on from there. When we present the program, what we present is the curriculum, which is the actually educator textbooks that we've written, which actually has the program delivered in levels: foundations, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So it's delivered in a way that structurally makes sense. Everywhere there is another objective, you know what comes before it. It is supported by resources online. So we have got now a massive subscription. So, well, it's not, we have over 15,000 individual sheets on the subscription service. And that lovely caricature is me to say that you're never alone, you are supported, but it's not just by me, because we're building a community as well. We are really lucky that the actual program is currently being delivered in both mainstream and specialist settings, primary and secondary, and indeed further education. So we are covering all educational sectors. And it's not just in the UK. We are as far afield as New Zealand. So we actually have got operations. We have got schools using it as far afield as in that way, and also in North America. The curriculum and structure, we talked about the levels. Book 1 has got the first 2 levels, foundations level 1, and then it moves on from there. The reason that we do it in levels is because we recognize that lots of these students are working at conceptual levels rather than at academic year or at anything age related. So what we do is we build it very much on a, this is what you need to know first. Then when you master that, this is what you need to know next. And I always liken it to the fact that if you've got a finite capacity for learning in your brain, let's fill it with the most useful stuff first, and then let's add to that once we master that concept. We do cover the breadth of mathematical topics. So we actually do have all, I say 3, there is actually a 4th. Topic 0 in book 1 is developing pre-number skills. So Maths for Life starts right at the beginning. There is nothing before it. It starts with the pre-number skills. And we quite often ask our students to go back to topic 0, because to reinforce some of the reasoning, the logic, the procedural with regard to pre-number skills and how we then use them later on in life. So sometimes going back to the beginning is great. So topic 0, developing pre-number skills, is in book 1. And then every other book contains the 3 topics we've designed as containing all the mathematical concepts. We've got understanding number and the number sense, using common measures, shape and space, which includes time and money, and then handling information and data. We do time and money, and we start at foundations. We do data handling, and we start at foundations in that topic. And that's one of the things that's been recognized is quite different. But also, interestingly, one of the most improved when we look at our children and our students who are on the program. So it's a brilliant, exciting area. Can we move on? Oh, we've had a rejig of slides, right? So pre-number skills, when we talk about what they are and we talk about the visuals we use, we have then identified certain weaknesses, and quite often we do pre-number skills at one level, at the obvious level, and then we move on as secured. But what we find is that we need to build a depth when we look at our pre-number skills, same and different. When we're looking at subtle, when we're looking at category differences, we need to keep improving those skills, which is why we talked about going back to pre-number skills. Thank you, Jo. When it comes to numbers and number sense, we have identified a massive, especially in the Down syndrome community, we identified conservation of number as being a something that was just not covered. And in fact, when we tested it with most children, they didn't get it. So this idea that there's magic in numbers, if you don't add or take away any, you have to have the same number. They find that conceptually really difficult. So we have done quite a lot of work on looking at these weaknesses and actually providing resources and additional resources to actually target the learning. So again, some of the things that we look at is the fact that, quite often we read we count from left to right in a straight line, but what happens when we actually do dynamic counting? So we do quite a lot of work in numbers and number sense. Keep going. The next slide. Shape measures in space. We said it includes time and money. One of the things that we concentrate heavily on is time passing at the foundations level, because we realized quite quickly that underpinning telling the time needs the conceptual understanding of what time passing is, both in clock and calendar. And again, we find out from our initial research in the Down syndrome community that that was sorely lacking. And indeed, we're finding it in the mainstream arena as well, because it doesn't actually appear on the current curriculum. It's not topics that are covered. Time starts with telling the time rather than underpinning it. And the next slide, please. So when we build, data handling. Yes, so we touched upon data handling. What's really fascinating is this is applied maths. This is about understanding when you put together what is it you're seeing. But because it's more interesting to a lot of children and it's actually more visual and actually more true to life, we seem to find that our data handling skills improve, and it engages children because they can see where they're using their skills. So again, we have found that this is one of the fastest improving areas with our students, which is fantastic because it is something that can be applied in real life. Thank you, Joe. So when we actually present each topic, when it's written, it's broken down into small incremental step changes. And part of Maths for Life and why it's effective is because it targets the understanding and confidence of the educator as well as delivering a program to the student. So we recognize that quite a lot of the adult educators who are providing, whether it be parents, teaching assistants, learning skills assistants, or indeed some of the teaching staff in primary, we know that their confidence when it comes to maths it can be quite poor, or they may indeed suffer from maths anxiety. So by actually breaking down each of our objectives, explaining what it is, understanding the prior checklist. So this allows us to actually understand what the building blocks are. If a class is doing a certain topic, it allows that TA to be able to differentiate within the topic to pick something for that student that is actually a building block for it. We have the objective broken down into achievable steps, and everything about the actual program is then supported. Sorry, going back and forth. The ideas for teaching. The ideas for teaching actually migrated into the next slide, which is the resource library. So I wrote a list of ideas for teaching, but then I also did some sample workbooks, which were so well received that I got asked to deliver more and more, and that's exactly what's happened. So one of the things that really sets us apart from most other providers is that we have age neutral content. So when we're talking about the market of students where we have intellectual difficulties, we are aware of the fact they also understand that at times they're doing babyish work whenever it's marked with different year groups. So there's nothing more disheartening than an 11-year-old who's in year 6 working on year 1 tagged work. So what's wonderful is all our work is age neutral. So therefore you have got the same content that can be worked on by a 6-year-old, a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old. We will not offend anyone. There are obviously going to be preferences within it. We have objective-based workbooks, which allow you to go in depth and lots of repetition on one specific topic. We have general weekly workbooks, which allows you to take, at any point in time, take a level and dip into any aspect of it. We've just introduced a third one for a special school, which is progression workbooks, which allows a class teacher to be able to deliver a topic across multiple levels. We have assessments and records of progress, and we have also a community forum that we're growing. I say support is available. I do run weekly Q&A sessions that anyone is able to drop into so that they have support, but there is lots of training and tutorial videos available, and we do a lot of knowledge sharing. We've just launched our SEN school network because obviously I provide all the ingredients, but I'm not implementing it on a day-to-day basis. But the SEN school network are going to join forces to talk about how they're implementing it in different schools and share ideas, which is really powerful. So we had 15 SEN schools join last week, and we've already had several more requests to join, so that will be growing. Thank you, Joe. So with regard, we touched upon the assessments. This is one of the reasons that assessments are slightly different, but we did do this. This is what the actual research is all about. And when we do an assessment, we record the accuracy. So we ask them to look at how they've answered a question, but we also record something different, which is the independence. How much help were they given by the educator? And we have this other no attempt score. So we do allow children and educators to decide that they're not going to attempt a question. And this is all based on the hierarchy of independence. And this is what sets us about being able to understand more about what students know and don't know truly. And I want to take you on a little fast journey. Joe's going to have to be quick on these slides. But I want to tell you where this came from, because it makes sense when I give context. Oh.
Sorry, Karen, I just realized that these were the previous slides. I don't know what happened to...
that makes sense.
Yeah, here we go. I put them in the wrong folder. Apologies. I'm going to go through the right slides and share again. 1 second. Too many things.
That's great. So this is what Jo does to me. She's given me the slides in the wrong order. I'm still able
Sorry
to talk.
about that. I was chatting
the next bit is a lot harder to talk without the slides. So if we go down to yeah. So here, okay. So we're going to start here. So this is Astra's laughing. This is the reason that this is how it came about. So I have 3 sons. So I've mentioned, it's been alluded to. These are my 3 versions of blonde. Next slide, please. This is my eldest, Dexter, and he likes to dress to impress. Next slide. This is my youngest, Cal, and he dresses for adventure. And this is Lance. He dresses in whatever I give him. Okay, that's interesting. Now, Lance's EHCP states Lance can dress himself. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of what an education, health and care plan is, but when something like that is stated, I always say it can be interpreted by different people reading that document as different things. So for me as a parent, I know what it means. But if you're looking at it from a DWP perspective, they may look at it as something different. And when it comes down to it, is it true Lance can dress himself? Cal will dress himself. He'll ask me what's happening today. He'll look outside at the weather. He will go upstairs and come downstairs dressed and appropriate. Can Lance do the same? No, because his clothes are pre-selected and bought for him to be elasticated, slightly larger, easier to put on, no zips or buttons. They're orientated in the right way, so he knows the order in which to put them on. He can largely get himself into clothes. Sometimes he gets stuck. And he needs assistance pulling the tongues out of his trainers, or else he pushes them in. So in truth, if we move to the next slide, the statement is Lance can dress himself with scaffolding. And it's really important that everyone who interfaces with Lance understands what that scaffolding is, because then we're talking like for like. If you continue on, Joe. So to have a true and balanced understanding of attainment, what somebody can do, what somebody knows, we need complete transparency on the level of scaffolding provided. And this is how the hierarchy of independence came about. And I'd like you to go through, we're going to go through each stage and briefly explain what that means in a mathematical context. So at the starting level demonstrated, what this means is the adult educator is demonstrating the topic, demonstrating the work, demonstrating the maths to the student, and there's little or no interest from the student. I love this picture because it shows Ella playing with her scrunchie rather than looking at what I'm providing her. So this is where we start. The next level up, direct model, the adult's still taking the lead, but now we have engagement. We have the student as the magician's assistant. So they're helping out. Which one matches? Help me find this one. Can you find the pneumicon that matches this? And this is a lovely photograph of Samuel copying what I'm doing on a video. But there is engagement, but they're very much being led and modeled to by the adult educator. Next slide. So the next level up is direct prompts used. So there is a step change. The student's now taking the lead role, but the adult educator is still providing language input that helps with the maths. What this means is they're saying, do you think we should use an underline? Shall we use our pointy finger? Do you need to count on? Shall we count on? What number are we counting on from? Yeah. Do you think we need to count? All of that is helpful in actually working out the maths that is required to do. The next level recognizes that there are some students who without any additional input wouldn't do anything. So, but you can give input that's not subject content. It's actually just encouragement. So indirect prompts means that the adult educator is giving some help, but none of the prompts or none of the words, none of the vocabulary they're using is helping towards understand the maths. So it's things like, what do you think we should do? What comes next? You know this. We did something like this last week. Can you remember? Come on, concentrate. Time to get this done. So all of that lovely encouragement, but without the mathematical input. The next level, which is assisted reading, it's really important to understand that some students' objection to doing maths is because they don't want to read the questions. But it is really important to understand that they can still do all the mathematical concepts if somebody reads what is required. But when we talk about assisted reading, it is just that. It's a scribe. It's not changing. It's not explaining. And then the last level, which is the level that we're working towards, it's completely independent. And that's lovely Tom, who did all those sheets in one day. But the goal is for complete independence. Simple maths done accurately and independently. However, if you're not able to read, if reading is a showstopper, guess what? If we understand that, but they can continue to learn maths at a higher level, they can sit qualifications with a scribe. So again, it's really good to understand that level and demarcation. And that's how we created the hierarchy of independence. And if we move to the next slide, when we put this together, if you go to the next slide, with the assessments, you suddenly find that you have a lot more information with regard to the true understanding and true attainment levels of students. Because when you actually ask our educators how much help they're giving the students, you realize quite quickly they're giving a lot more help than you anticipated. And quite often we find that when results come back, when students are looking at it, when educators are looking at it, they're disappointed by the results, but they're not. It's actually a more true reflection of what students can and can't do. Is that my last slide or have I got? Yeah. Oh, yeah. There you go. There's my graph. So that was just the initial data that I started to gather in the Down syndrome community showed overall attainment. This is just one of the graphs to show that it's quite spiky, but we were able to see the progression. But if you look at the age in months, it's quite a slow, gradual progression. But it was much more true understanding of where students were. And the next slide. What it also allows us to do is actually, because we're doing all our analysis by topic, we're able to actually define how well students are doing by topic, by individual incremental topic. And we start to process this into how can we do things differently in Maths for Life to improve the areas of weakness, which we've already talked about. Hopefully, one of the things that will come from the larger scale project that we're working with Oxford on is more analysis by different complex need as well. Okay. So why evaluate Maths for Life? We've already seen from a parent-led perspective, Down syndrome Oxford, who are now 3 years down this path, we've seen massive improvement in the students that have been on that. And therefore, we wanted to build upon that. By understanding more, we've talked about it, by understanding more of the weaknesses and strengths of the students, the programme can be adapted to target these areas. And we are already doing that to our success. So things like time passing that we've talked about, by targeting that, we are seeing an improvement in the time subject. We need to establish whether or not there are trends with complex needs. So are we seeing the same things time and time again, or are there differences depending on the actual complex need of the student? And it's going to be brilliant to provide evidence to the wider community. We're having lots of anecdotal evidence, and we're seeing lots of success in schools' retention in using the programme for more and more students year on year. But it would be really great from a research perspective to be able to deliver something to the wider community with some backed research, which is always great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. So yes, so that led us then to 2 pilot intervention studies that we'll be talking about today. So the first one is the work we did on Down syndrome with Down Syndrome Oxford Charity. And then that grew into a wider project now with Oxford County Council, where we're looking at the impact of Maths for Life for a mixed special educational needs and disability groups. And I'm just going to talk you through those 2 studies. So in the first one, it's a collaboration with Katie Gilligan-Lee and Holly from the University of Surrey at the time, who are now obviously in Ireland. So talking a little bit about Down syndrome for those of you who are less aware about Down syndrome. So although there is limited information still on mathematical development in individuals with Down syndrome, beyond looking at just arithmetic skills, there are now a few studies that have shown that indeed many individuals with Down syndrome are delayed in their mathematical development. And, you know, mathematical achievement, meaning data from Sue Buckley suggests that they might be 2 years behind their literacy development as well. Although, as Karen already alluded, there are some individuals with Down syndrome who also find reading a challenge. So the gap is not always there for everyone. So in the first study, we explored whether the Maths for Life program can improve indeed mathematical abilities of individuals with Down syndrome, and then whether that has an impact on the independence and when they're solving mathematical problems. And so this study focused on individuals with Down syndrome, children and young people, and we compared them to a business as usual control group who received no intervention. So this was a study that included 32 children and young people with Down syndrome of a relatively wide age range of 5 to 24 years old. And so the intervention group were recruited by the Down Syndrome Oxford Charity, and then the control group was recruited afterwards, matching the intervention group, but recruited from personal networks and social media. So basically, both groups completed one group completed a Maths for Life program, but both groups completed the Maths for Life assessment that Karen was talking about before and after a 4-month either gap or intervention. So we started with pre-intervention assessment, then one group had the Maths for Life program and the other group had the business as usual, and then there was the post-assessment roughly about 4 months later. So the Maths for Life mathematical assessment has 120 questions in it at the pre-intervention assessments, and it covers a lot of different topics, including numeracy, shapes, etc. These assessments were administered by the parent, as Karen mentioned before. The intervention group also completed their typical maths teaching in the school, and then the Maths for Life program was delivered at home by the parents in addition to what they were receiving in school. Whereas in the control group, they just had their normal maths teaching in the school. Post-intervention, we found out that there was an additional question in the post-assessment, but other than that, all the questions were like for like in terms of pre and the post assessment, and this has been rectified now in the new Maths for Life assessment. So very briefly on the results in terms of comparing these before and after, and I'll show you some graphs in a minute, but overall there were no differences between the groups for any of the measures, so all participants were performing at a similar level before the intervention. And at post-intervention, so we did an ANCOVA looking at the different scores, but co-varying for, looking at the post scores, but co-varying for their pre-intervention scores. And we didn't find any significant effects there between the groups in terms of their overall accuracy and also in the no attempt scores. So looking at how many times did students not want to complete something. However, we did find that there was a significant difference between the two groups, so larger gains in the intervention group than the control group when it came to the independence scores, with a reasonable effect size. So if you can see here, in terms of the overall accuracy, there is no difference between the two groups. If we look at the independence scores, the control group started actually a lot higher, but didn't improve that much, whereas our intervention group was lower and did improve significantly so. In terms of the no attempt scores, we do see that the intervention group had a higher level of no attempt scores to start with, as well as at the end, but the difference was not significantly so. Of course, we're talking about a relatively small sample size. So overall, I mean, this was the first pilot study done with the Maths for Life program. And what we can see is that it did help individuals with Down syndrome to develop their independence when completing maths tasks beyond what is delivered in the typical school curriculum. Of course, you know, we can ask the question, this program was delivered at home when maybe individuals with Down syndrome were already tired. You know, it was also delivered by the parents. And the question is, you know, would this also work in schools? Would the effects be, what would be the effects seen on a standardized mathematical measure? So it's always important in research to see if we can replicate effects with measurements that have previously been established as being reliable and valid. And could this work approach, so the Maths for Life approach, work with other students who are struggling with mathematics learning, but who may or may not have Down syndrome. And that led us to the second pilot that is currently happening. So in this project, it's slightly bigger, and Karen can maybe later on say a little bit more about the second part of the project. But the primary aim of the project was to independently evaluate the efficacy of the Maths for Life program on the maths attainment of students with a range of SEND needs delivered by the school. And this part of the project is funded by a very tiny funding by the Bailey Thomas Foundation Trust. And then Karen is also looking at whether this delivering the Maths for Life program at school has a positive impact on the support staff working with those students with SEND in terms of their, you know, how confident they feel in delivering a curriculum to improve mathematical abilities of those with special educational needs. So we're in this project, we're targeting primary school children aged 5 to 11 who have a range of special educational needs and disabilities, so we're including hearing impaired, visually impaired students, as well as those with a range of specific learning difficulties. And we're recruiting a control group that are matched to the terms of the special educational needs, so level of maths, socioeconomic status and age. So we first recruited the intervention group and then recruited the control group so we could match one child to another. So we started in September 2023 with our first assessment. So I won't be able to show you full results yet because we're not yet at the end of our project. But our aim was to recruit 100 children to take part in the intervention group. They would then have intervention between September and June. And in June 2024, we'll go back and repeat our assessment. And then we have our delayed intervention group or our control group who have also been assessed, but they would have business as usual in their school, and they'll also be assessed in June, and then hopefully start on the Maths for Life project afterwards. How are we assessing the children? So we have a number of standardized tasks that we're using from the British Ability Scale. So we have the matrices task, where students are shown a picture, and there's a piece missing within the pattern, and they're asked to point to which picture completes the pattern. We also have the British Ability Scale single word reading tasks, which is our control task. So we're kind of expecting no change on the single word reading because the Maths for Life program, although it includes reading, but you know, it's not specifically targeted at reading per se. And then we have two measures from the British Ability Scales that measure mathematical development. So one is quantitative reasoning. This is more your non-verbal reasoning, and apologies, my picture is blocking the answer. But basically the child is again, similarly to the matrices, shown a pattern, a numerical pattern. There's a circle here at the bottom, and they're asked, well, what needs to come here, and asked to draw what needs to come here or to tell us what needs to come here. So it's all about seeing non-verbal patterns, basically. Later on, quantitative reasoning in the higher sets goes on to symbolic reasoning as well, so completing numerical patterns. And then in the Bridges ability skills, the number skills task, students are given these kind of typical questions you see on mathematical assessments. So Kylie bought 4 apples, she ate 1. How many did she have left? And there's pictures to help support the children's word problem solving abilities. So the assessors, who were us, we were blind to whom was in which group. We also were not involved in the recruitment because this was all done through Oxford County Council. And we did ask parents to complete the strengths and difficulties questionnaire at both times to kind of see what overall strengths and difficulties these children have, because we weren't able, well, the matrices tell us something about their overall cognitive abilities, but not much around their behavioral abilities. And we're also including in the study a few issues around fidelity. So there is a short survey that the trainers, the teachers completed to check their understanding of the Maths for Life implementation and projects. We know that Oxford County Council and also Karen is doing a lot of work around check-ins to see how the Maths for Life program is being delivered in the different schools. We won't be able to track the dosage on a one-to-one basis for the children, but we will be able to ask the school around measures of attendance for particular children to see if there are some children for whom the dosage may have been particularly low. And at the end of in June, we'll also be able to provide the teachers with a final survey just to see around how they've implemented it, whether they've had any issues, etc. So I know these are just a few light touches of fidelity, but you know, it's better than having absolutely nothing. So where are we now? It's been really tricky to recruit some of the participants. So we have slightly over 72 now students in the intervention group who've started. Working with a wider group of students with SEND means that we're also working with a wider group of parents who may not always be as eager to take part in research as maybe we've done before when we work with very targeted groups like parents of children with Down syndrome or Williams syndrome. And what's been particularly difficult is our control schools. So our control schools, they've been promised that they'll get reports about how their students are doing and what they can do to help improve their students afterwards. But again, because the schools aren't so signed up or involved with it and need to get parental consent for all these students to take place, this take-up has been very low. We're slightly higher now than 15, but you know, we really are struggling to recruit. However, even though we may not get a full control group, there is still a lot of data that we could look at within this study, especially with those 75, 78 students that we have in the intervention group. Of course, it will still allow us to look at our standardized data that we get from the Bridges ability scales to see how that correlates or relates to the data that is delivered by the Maths for Life, which is a teacher assessment, and to see whether that indeed Maths for Life assessment can be reliably used. And that would be really helpful and insightful, I think, for the Maths for Life program moving forward. We can still look at our time 1 to time 2 improvement in our intervention group to see really, like we did before, whether in students with SEND improve in their mathematical development. And we can still compare it even to the data we had on the Down syndrome group in our first pilot study. And if everything fails and we can't, recruit a control group that is large enough this year, well, hopefully we can go back to some schools next year and, get some more data for a control group. Karen, did you want to say anything about the secondary research project?
Yes, so one of the reasons that Oxfordshire County Council have sponsored and are leading this is they believe that one of the challenges we're facing in the future is the job satisfaction of our learning skills and teaching assistants. And they, through some of the work that has been happening in some of the schools in Oxfordshire who have been using the Maths for Life longer, they've seen they've seen a probably an increased enthusiasm for maths amongst those that are delivering the program. And one of the aspects that they're keen to see is whether or not a program of maths that can be delivered by non-professional teachers, i.e., so the kind of the workforce that have not got qualifications in teaching, whether that helps with that kind of sense of job satisfaction and achievement. So that's one of the aspects. Obviously, from my perspective as well, we're constantly, Maths for Life is a, kind of a constant revisiting and improving. So we're seeing how easy it is to roll out with a large group of students, with an increased group of students. How do we manage that? How they're going to use their planning? Because we always say we give the ingredients, but we do not give a scheme of work. What they have to do is figure out what bit they want to do when. So again, we're doing an awful lot of understanding what that looks like and what we can do to help. And I think one of the things that, Joe alluded to, it has been a challenge from a parental perspective. But one of the things that we identified in the Down syndrome community with regard to the pilot that we've done, even with Down syndrome Oxford, it's always been with proactive parents. It's always been with a socio-economic group that I kind of go, they're invested in their children's education. Whereas the group of students that we're looking at are a wide-ranging group of students. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether Maths for Life can affect more of a change at school with those students, because we know that they're never going to be able to avail of the program at home. So that's, from a personal perspective, I'm very keen that, we get that information about the groups that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be availing of this program through parental or charity provision. So we have, it's quite exciting, and I know that there's challenges, but we've been absolutely dealing with those challenges on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, both of you. That was so enjoyable. I have so many thoughts. We do have a few questions in the chat. The first one is actually, can they see the slide with the independence levels again? So your framework of independence. Yes, that's the one. Brilliant. Before I dive into the other questions, I'd like to take my chair privilege, because I think it's so important to sort of contextualize this work that you're doing. I really think that it's so important to highlight like the philosophical implications of the whole approach, because I feel like SEND provision is often, you have not met the standard that is expected of you, that the system expects, so you have failed, so we're going to do something that's inferior to what you should have been doing. I know when I interviewed you earlier this year, you told me about the functional skills qualification, which is typically only available to students that have already failed their GCSE maths. And what really impresses me about this approach is that it doesn't set students up to fail before they can make progress. It actually meets them where they are. The skills are useful, they're important to life, they're valuable, and it really helps them to develop and move forward whatever stage that they're at. Now, I don't know if I have a question as such, except, what do you think about like moving towards this more equitable curricular design for SEND students?
Well, personally speaking, I would have it for all students, because I'm over the failure method. So I've recently been talking with all the influencers in the maths world, talking about the future of the maths curriculum. The question was the GCSE fit for purpose? And the conclusion was no, but they weren't really sure what was. And what I got from it was, well, while you're all talking, I'll continue doing. But for me, I think it's, when we look at where this goes to, what I want to get out of it is our adult population being able to actually have something that says, I can do all this, and that's what you need to do this job. And the employer goes, yeah, I can see that, rather than a simplified grade, which doesn't actually articulate anything to an employer. So a GCSE grade of 2, 3, 5, 6 does not necessarily equate to I can do the maths that is associated with this job. Whereas I think I'd like Maths for Life to become that kind of, this is something that says these students have got a value to give. These students have the mathematical ability to add the value in this employment, in this job, and they can, and it's all positive, they can do all of this and they can do it all independently, which is very different approach to, you know, what we traditionally have. So yeah, I'm all for it for everyone, but I have to start somewhere. So I started small.
Straight from a researcher's point of view, it's always interesting that, you know, this is as close as to Vygotsky scaffolding as you can get, right, in terms of a curriculum that is developed. And yeah, I taught a lot about Vygotsky and why it's really difficult to evaluate, but Karen is doing it, you know, not failing. And I think the hierarchy of independence really helps with that. And the nice thing is students, because it's not childish, students can keep going back and back, and that's so important for mathematical development. And we often fail at doing that in schools, to go back to material that's been seen earlier that may have been forgotten. And I think it's really interesting because it's a question I'm asked a lot by parents of students with SEND, or especially it's come up with Down syndrome and Williams syndrome. It's like, it seems my child can do something, and then a couple of weeks later, they can no longer do this. Have they forgotten? Do they need to go back again? And that's what Maths for Life seems to be addressing here as well, is that going back, you know, and going back to, and it's because it's not that kind of fast progressing curriculum.
Yeah, and I think because of that real constructivist, you know, scaffolding approach that you've taken from a research perspective, it's really, really useful and interesting as well, because it's so specific to the skills that you're developing and also the level that the student is progressing at. So yeah, a researcher's gold mine, Karen. Yeah. Anyway, there are a couple of specific questions in the chat. So the first one, Alexandra asks, how was independence measured? And I think this is referring to the pilot study where they progressed in independence.
That was using the hierarchy of independence, so that score that they get, you know, so this was an average score they were given. So every item was scored by the parent, and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the parents rated every item around how independently their child could complete it, or how much support they gave. We averaged it across all of the questions and then did that again afterwards. Of course, that data is very rich. We can also start delving in more into that data in terms of what items did students need more independence with, and would that match again in post-assessment? We haven't really looked at the richness of the data that we've got, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got a lot of data, and even I haven't touched the surface on some of it, but the actual independence is one of those ones. By giving a 6-point scaffold, so we've given them 6 points, they have to choose. Even if they're comparing, like, or is it one, or it's still 6 points. So it's better than 2. Even if you kind of bunch it up into brackets, it's still getting the educator to think. And we've always said this is, you can have one educator who might think slightly differently to the other, but remember the same person did the pre and post. So again, so long as and we say it, so long as you're consistent in how you marked it, you get a difference. So you get the comparable difference. And that, because it's not me or another person doing the actual evaluation, it's actually the people working, it's the teaching assistants on this, the pilot. It's the teaching assistants. We're very much getting them to be honest as well, because that's the other side. We're all very good at elevating our children's abilities. So again, but if it's the same person doing it both sides, the difference is consistent.
That's a really good point. I'm actually going to skip, so Guy has asked 2 questions here. I'm going to skip to the second one. I'll come back to the other one because she's asking, is it hard to assess fidelity? So yes. This obviously links to yes. what you were just saying. Yeah.
So ideally, Gaia, when Karen and I talked about this, I had this idea that, schools could fill in a diary, a daily diary very quickly, tick box, like, has the child done it? Yes. What level were they doing? Yes. How well did it go? Or how much support did you have to give? But it's already been so difficult to recruit schools that we had to throw that out of the window for this pilot study. But I think, this is something to address further, in future studies where we get maybe a little bit more money and, you know, a little bit more support, so we can work with the schools at a much closer level and give the schools more support, basically, in terms of delivering the intervention and the research element of it.
And it's when we talk about the intervention, the students that are using it in Oxford are using it on a daily basis. So actually, you know, you could default by saying they're directed to do it in their maths lesson every day. So it should be 30 minutes every day. But we know that if we take that as a read, we know that that might not be the case. So there's that aspect of what's being directed and what actually happens. So we have to be very careful, you know, about that. But the other aspect, and Joe knows this as well, Oxfordshire County Council are footing the bill for the Maths for Life there. They want it used. So they are being very flexible. Some of the schools have come to us who've started and said, look, we just don't have the bandwidth, or we haven't been able to do the assessments, but we want to. So, you know, we actually have over 300 students on it. So even the actual intervention is only a fraction of the students that are actually using it in Oxford. So, you know, the goal is to have it used, and then some of the evidence out the other side that won't form this particular part of research will be what schools thought of it, whether or not they're seeing children engage, because the feedback is children are engaging with it for the first time. Some of the students who have never engaged with any maths to date are engaging with it. And we know that that is a tick box, you know, but again, quantifying that is, you know, while they haven't engaged with maths for 3 years, it's not been a research project, but suddenly the students doing maths is like, well, I'll take that and run with it, but it's not going to form part of the research project. So, you know, it is, you know, the fidelity, and I only find out what the word fidelity meant by working with Joe. I thought it meant something different entirely, but I've learned a lot. And, you know, we constantly come up against what is practical and who needs what. And is that research? Is that Oxford? Is that Maths for Life? You know, we always have the, you know, what's in it for who, and how are we trying to structure this? Because we can't do it. We haven't been able to map out something that works for everyone. Yeah.
We've had lots of conversations around that. It's really interesting working as a researcher with external companies as well as schools. It's around, indeed, as Karen says, there's so many different aspects, and you know, you want to implement gold standard RCT, and then you've got reality. You've got schools and children and parents who are at the end of it, and it's really difficult to kind of merge the two. So we're doing the best we can, but these are really interesting questions.
Absolutely. I mean, in my own experience, I feel like fidelity in school-based interventions, or rather measuring fidelity, is the first thing to go, because the bandwidth, you know, in schools is so low. Like, even if you make the simplest little checkbox, it's so hard for people to actually take 5 seconds, you know, to actually think, did I do this? Yes, I did this, you know. Yes, Guy, if you want to go ahead and talk, there is one more question from you I was going to put to them.
Oh no,
yeah.
I didn't want to jump in, but if I'm stealing my own questions, it's okay.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, go on. You're in your own questions. Go for it.
I really enjoyed this, so I thought I wanted to say thank you for the great talks and lessons learned. I am still really interested in this question of how if you know, I don't know if anybody involved in educational RCTs can think of good ways of assessing fidelity for interventions that are flexible, like, you know, that require flexibility. In fact, I mean, even the tick box is maybe telling you something about adherence. Do people do it, rather than how they do it? So, I mean, that's something I've really got stuck on, because if part of the critical ingredient of your intervention is to scaffold flexibly, then actually that's really hard to quantify. It's unlike just following the motions and doing A, B, C, and D, a scripted following through. That's not quite what you're doing. That's not what you want, in fact, to happen. So I don't know. I don't want to waste everyone's time with.
No, I think it's an interesting question. There's part of that is, you know, like, it depends on what you mean by the fidelity, right? I think this goes back to theories of change, and the ingredient, as you mentioned there, is the scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult to measure that one, the scaffolding, except for if you kind of ask them to give a rating. I think this is where, again, the hierarchy that Karen has created could be used here. Mm-hmm. If schools could every day say how much did they use that hierarchy of independence, because it makes people think about scaffolding, and then that's the key element. Mm-hmm. When you talk to people who who do the more larger scales interventions, they probably will say like, well, does that matter so much in terms of how much and quantity and the quality, you know, will come
Well,
out?
I mean, it should, if you're
But it is.
interested in the
I
theory of
think
change, it should, that you
it
are
should,
targeting
exactly,
appropriately, right?
and I think the only way around it, if you're really interested in the qualities, you need to do a qualitative analysis, which is do observations in the classroom.
Observations, yeah. No, I
I think
wondered whether,
very
sorry, I apologize because I arrived late. Maybe you talked about observations already and I had missed it.
No, we would love to
No.
do all of that, but we didn't have bandwidth in this pilot to do that. But it's something we'll keep it in our mind for the next time, Gaia. That's brilliant.
Brilliant. And Gaia's final question, which I think might be a nice way to round back to the program, actually, and Karen, you can give us a little bit more information about it, is how young are the youngest students that Maths for Life works with?
Oh, we have toddlers, because actually parents in the Down syndrome community have engaged with their 2-year-olds. And whenever people say to me, how young can you start it? I go, well, remembering what I said, the program is 50, you know, it's 50-50. If you work on the educator and build their confidence up to know what to deliver in the early years, then it actually helps them. So from my perspective, as a parent, if you got involved before preschool, if you got involved and actually just even read what pre-number skills the section was and understand about that, you will understand how simple changes in your language, simple changes in how you do things can make a massive difference. And what we find, and it's kind of, you know, this is again Oxfordshire Oxfordshire Down syndrome group. We had a range of students who started this, but what's really interesting is those that started it younger are faster through the process than the other ones. And that's why I've had to write so many levels. It's literally, I thought I'd get away with it, but level 5 is being currently sketched, because actually the earlier you get the solidified building blocks, the easier it is to progress. So in some of our teenagers, we're having to go back and close the gaps before they can move forward. Whereas obviously the younger you start, you're actually cohesively moving forward on those levels. And those levels are comprehensive, and you can move between levels and work between levels. So it's not a linear process. Yeah, somebody described, a maths geek drew me a map and said, it's circular, isn't it, Karen? And I was like, well, whatever you want to visualize, but it's basically allowing you to kind of grow. So no, there is no younger limit. It's just how involved you want to get. Obviously, parents, we know the lovely parents in the Down syndrome community, you know, buy it at birth. And I've still got equipment that I bought for my son Lance when he was 18 months that I've still yet to use, because I was one of those parents. But even just knowing about the language and understanding pre-number skills will make a difference. And obviously that is one of the things that we've got some very young students who have started it with this pilot. So we should be able to see that. Okay. As well as older ones. That's the luxury of it, is our oldest student is 36.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Joe
Thank
needs to
you
go.
so much.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to finish bang on today, unfortunately, but thank you so much to both of you. It's such an inspiring project. I'm going to be watching it very, very closely. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody, and we will see you at the next one.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you so much for having us, Astrid.
No
Yeah,
worries.
thank you indeed. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.